On July 24, 2025, Tonny Iommi was overwhelmed with emotion upon hearing the devastating news that his close friend and musical brother, Ozzy Osbourne, had passed away. The shock hit him hard, and in a moment of despair, Tonny collapsed, tears streaming down his face, especially painful as he was already battling cancer. This tragic loss only intensified his suffering. Having experienced both glory and hardship throughout his career with Black Sabbath, Tonny now felt utterly alone on what had already been a difficult journey. But the death of Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a personal heartbreak, it marked the end of a legendary era in rock music. Beneath the surface of this loss were hidden struggles, silent battles behind the scenes, and long-standing tensions within the band. No one could have foreseen such a journey, the story of a man who refused to surrender, even when confronted with death itself. Tonny Iommi's path began in adversity. Born on February 19, 1948, in Birmingham, England, into a working-class Italian family, Tonny grew up in a modest home. His father, Giovanni Iommi, was a strict and diligent man who worked in the tough and dangerous metal industry. His mother, Sylvia, was a kind-hearted and devoted woman who took care of the household. Though there was love, the family lacked material wealth, and supporting Tonny's budding interest in music was not something they could afford. As the youngest of 3 children, Tonny showed an early passion for music, but the resources to nurture that interest simply weren't there. Still, Tonny felt an inexplicable connection to music, and the guitar became his outlet for self-expression. Since his family couldn't buy him an instrument, he built his own guitars from wood and homemade strings, learning through any books and sheet music he could find. These self-made instruments didn't always sound great, but the process cultivated Tonny's imagination and independence. One of his greatest inspirations was Django Reinhardt, a renowned French guitarist who, despite losing 2 fingers in an accident, continued to play and made a lasting mark on music. Django's story resonated with Tonny and gave him the determination to push through both financial and physical barriers. His parents, however, weren't entirely supportive of his dream. They preferred he choose a stable career path and didn't see music as a viable option. But Tonny's passion was too strong to be extinguished. He taught himself to play, experimented constantly, and gradually earned recognition in local Birmingham music clubs. Even though money remained tight, his skill gained him a place in the city's growing rock scene. Tonny's real turning point, and greatest challenge, came in 1968 when tragedy struck. While working in a steel factory, he suffered a horrific accident in which a cutting machine severed 2 fingers on his right hand. For a guitarist, this kind of injury could mean the end of a career. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional toll was worse. Tonny believed his musical future was over. A deep sense of hopelessness set in as he began to accept the idea that he could never play again. Yet, it was this very moment of despair that sparked one of Tonny's greatest acts of resilience. Refusing to give up, he took a bold and inventive step. He created plastic prosthetic fingertips to replace the ones he had lost. Without them, continuing to play would have been impossible. He crafted the prosthetics himself and had to adapt his entire technique to fit his new physical limitations. This innovation didn't just allow him to play again, it changed the course of rock music. He began tuning the guitar strings lower, producing a darker, heavier sound. This would later become the foundation of a new musical genre, heavy metal. Despite his reinvention, not everyone had faith in Tonny's abilities. Many musicians, producers, and industry insiders doubted that someone with only one functioning hand could succeed as a guitarist. They assumed the public would never accept his music. But rather than breaking his spirit, the skepticism only made Tonny more determined. Even without industry backing and with few allies in the music scene, he kept working, refining his style and building his sound. These setbacks helped shape Tonny into a unique artist who didn't follow the rules and constantly pushed his own boundaries. The hardships he endured eventually led him to the success he had dreamed of. While his journey began in struggle, those same struggles helped forge the dark, powerful guitar style that would become the signature sound of heavy metal. The obstacles Tonny faced weren't limited to poverty or injury, they included doubts from others and long odds. But through persistence, creativity, and an unrelenting drive, Tonny proved he could overcome anything life threw his way. Later in 1968, after rising from these immense challenges, Tonny Iommi made a life-changing decision. He joined forces with close friends, Ozzy Osbourne, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, to form a new band, Black Sabbath. However, their early days were anything but glamorous. With limited name recognition, the band struggled financially and lacked access to proper equipment or major performance opportunities. Most of their gigs were in small clubs, playing to modest crowds, and their music wasn't widely embraced at first. Nevertheless, the band's spirit remained unshaken. Every member held firm in their dedication to the music they believed in. Under Tonny's direction, Black Sabbath chose not to imitate the mainstream rock bands of the time. They forged their own path, one defined by originality, grit, and a sound unlike anything that had come before. Rather than following conventional musical patterns, Black Sabbath chose a different path, exploring bold, heavy, and dark sounds. Their focus shifted toward crafting an entirely new style of music, one that not only echoed the state of society but also delved deep into the internal struggles of every individual. At the center of this evolution was Tonny Iommi. His distinct, weighty guitar riffs became the essence of Black Sabbath. But he didn't just transform the way the guitar was played, he pioneered a brand new sound within rock itself, with his deep, ominous melodies that no one could have anticipated. It was Tonny who shaped a signature sound that introduced heavy metal to listeners everywhere, igniting a musical revolution that would define the 1970s. In 1970, Black Sabbath released Paranoid, an album that would be etched into history as one of the greatest heavy metal records of all time. Featuring powerful tracks like Iron Man, War Pigs, and Paranoid, this album didn't just alter rock music's course, it opened an entirely new chapter for metal as a genre. Each song delivered potent commentary on social injustice, the trauma of war, and mental crises, which allowed the band's message to connect deeply with rock audiences. Following the success of Paranoid, Black Sabbath quickly rose to international fame. Their next albums, Master of Reality, 1971, and Volume 4, 1972, carried that momentum forward, solidifying the band's position in rock history. Despite their meteoric rise, Black Sabbath faced no shortage of obstacles. Management conflicts, personnel changes, and creative disputes threatened to derail their progress. Through all of this, Tonny Iommi remained the unwavering force behind the band's unique sound. He not only crafted iconic guitar riffs that defined a genre but also preserved the band's spirit, steering them through triumphs and turmoil alike. Over time, Tonny earned his place as a monumental figure in music. He redefined guitar playing in both the rock and metal spheres and became a beacon of inspiration for millions of aspiring guitarists worldwide. By merging heavy guitar tones with shadowy lyrical themes, Black Sabbath's music created a radical new direction for rock, one that moved away from light, easy-listening melodies toward something deeper, heavier, and more reflective of life's brutal realities. Nevertheless, the journey was never easy. Black Sabbath encountered relentless challenges as they grew. Their early years were especially hard, contending with public skepticism and internal conflicts, ranging from band member changes to disagreements over artistic direction and struggles with producers. Still, they pushed forward, building a legacy that would become foundational to the identity of rock music itself. Then came a turning point, a massive personal crisis in 2012. At the height of his career with Black Sabbath, just as they were preparing for major tours and a new album, Tonny Iommi received devastating news: lymphoma. The diagnosis hit like a thunderbolt. For a musician like Tonny, the possibility that cancer might end his career was horrifying. The disease, silent, ruthless, and life-threatening, emerged just as he was navigating the pressures of fame and creativity. When he heard the news, everything else seemed to fade into irrelevance. The fears about his health, his life's work, and the band's future surged through him all at once, like an unstoppable wave. Though Tonny had endured countless hardships throughout his musical journey, nothing compared to this. The thought of death, something he had never seriously faced, now stood directly in his path. The treatment began, marked by punishing chemotherapy. The medications were brutal, tearing through his body day after day. Each session brought with it overwhelming nausea, crushing fatigue, and searing pain. Hospital visits became a daily ritual. As the months dragged on, Tonny's condition deteriorated. His strength dwindled, his hair fell out, and his complexion faded to a sickly pallor. At times, the exhaustion was so intense that he could hardly move, let alone function. But more than the physical toll, the emotional anguish of possibly losing music, the lifeblood of his existence, was what cut the deepest. Throughout this tormenting period, Tonny also had to grapple with unfinished band plans and the fear that Black Sabbath might not survive his illness. Every night, he lay in bed wondering if he would ever be able to play again, or if cancer would steal away everything he had built. Still, he clung to one anchor: music. Tonny's love for his instrument, his devotion to the band, and his connection to fans became his salvation. Even as his body weakened, he continued to write music and explore ways to share it with the world. He simply refused to allow the disease to destroy his dream. He kept attending hospital visits and even participated in recording sessions, despite barely being able to stand. For Tonny, music became more than passion, it became survival. But there was another shadow during this battle: loneliness. The long days and nights in the hospital, often without loved ones nearby, magnified his suffering. Even though Tonny had the support of family and friends, the emotional weight of being physically isolated made him feel as if he were staring down death alone. The sense of isolation only intensified when he realized that time might not be on his side. And yet, amid this darkness, Tonny found strength in solidarity, especially through the unwavering support of his bandmates, most notably Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy, despite dealing with personal demons of his own, stood by Tonny's side. He became Tonny's rock, a constant presence during the fight. They weren't just stage partners, they were brothers, bound by more than music, prepared to take on whatever life threw their way, together. Tonny's journey was not one paved with constant hope. In fact, some days were nothing short of agonizing. The worst of them were consumed by unbearable pain brought on by chemotherapy, fatigue that gripped his body, weakness that drained his limbs, and hair loss that stripped away pieces of his identity. His physical strength was pushed to its absolute limit. Yet, no matter how broken his body felt, his spirit refused to give in. Still, there were vulnerable moments when the thought of giving up crossed his mind. During those times, he would reflect on everything he had accomplished with his music career. The legacy of Black Sabbath reminded him why he couldn't walk away. It wasn't just about personal pride, it was about honoring the fans who had supported him for decades and preserving the music that had changed lives. One of the most critical decisions he made during his treatment was agreeing to join Black Sabbath's final tour, the End Tour. It wasn't just a farewell for the band, it became a testament to Tonny's strength. Although illness had taken a toll on his performance abilities, Tonny still chose to walk out on stage, not with the same physical power as before, but with an emotional intensity that resonated deeply with every person in the crowd. Fans came not only for the music, but to witness the resilience of a legend who refused to let illness define his final bow. Through every moment of pain and hardship, Tonny pressed on. The love for his music, for Black Sabbath, and for his devoted fans gave him the energy to keep fighting. In those difficult days, he came to realize that no matter how severe the illness, music was a part of his soul, something no disease could take away. Then, on July 24, 2025, Tonny's already heavy world shattered. News of Ozzy Osbourne's death hit him like a crashing wave, drowning whatever hope he had left. Ozzy wasn't just a bandmate. He was a lifelong friend, a soul deeply intertwined with Tonny's own. After years of health battles, Ozzy had passed away, and with him went a part of Tonny's heart. This wasn't just the death of a collaborator. It was the closing of a sacred, irreplaceable chapter in his life. When Tonny heard the news, it felt as though the world around him had collapsed. Their relationship had always been more than music, more than stage shows or hit records. It was forged through struggle, bound by a brotherhood that had endured the toughest trials life could throw at them. They had been through everything together. From playing late nights in dingy clubs to battling addiction, from surviving the chaos of fame to holding on to the dream they had once nurtured in the streets of Birmingham, Tonny and Ozzy weren't just partners. They were survivors. They were brothers. Tonny remembered the long walks through Birmingham's dim backstreets, lugging their instruments from one tiny venue to another, chasing a dream that seemed impossible. Together, they turned Black Sabbath from an unknown group into a rock institution. Even when Ozzy was grappling with his own inner demons, he would lift Tonny up with words of encouragement. Their conversations, about life, about music, about pushing forward, were precious to Tonny, moments etched into the deepest corners of his memory. But Ozzy's passing forced him to confront an unbearable truth: he had lost a piece of himself. Still fighting cancer, Tonny now had to shoulder a grief that seemed impossible to bear. The emotional weight of losing Ozzy only deepened the pain already inflicted by his illness. Death had always been a known certainty, but losing someone so close made it feel like he was teetering at the edge of an empty void, alone in his suffering. His body may have been failing, but now his spirit was breaking too. Ozzy wasn't just a friend or a musical partner, he was a part of Tonny's very identity. With his passing, something vital inside Tonny faded. The memories of their shared life, their battles, their victories, their failures, rushed back in waves. The end of Black Sabbath felt more permanent now, not just because of age or illness, but because a key piece of its soul was gone. As Tonny reflected on their last days performing together, he saw how fragile it all had become. Both of them were fighting declining health, standing on what felt like the final summit of a journey with no road left to climb. Those last shows weren't about showmanship, they were about heart, about saying goodbye with everything they had left. The fear of death loomed over them both, and for Tonny, it felt like the final threads holding things together were fraying. Unlike before, when he could still hold onto a shred of hope, this time there was only the cold reality of loss. What stung the most wasn't just Ozzy's death, it was the loss of the brotherhood they had built through music. Black Sabbath's story had always been deeper than rock and roll. It was about survival, about connection, about finding light in the darkest of places. That's why Ozzy's passing wasn't just a personal blow for Tonny, it marked the end of an era. The bond they shared couldn't be replicated or replaced. It was a spiritual connection, born from shared wounds and shared victories. And when Ozzy died, that bond was broken in the most devastating way. But even in the middle of all that pain, Tonny came to a realization: he still had to live. He still had to fight. Though the loss of his closest companion left a wound that would never fully heal, the legacy they built together was still alive. Black Sabbath might never perform again, but their music, what they created together, would echo through time. Even without Ozzy beside him, Tonny would carry the torch. He would remain the last standing symbol of the band they built, keeping their story, their spirit, and their sound alive for the generations to come. In July 2025, the world was shaken by the death of Ozzy Osbourne. For Tonny Iommi, it wasn't just a personal loss, it marked the painful conclusion of a decades-long journey that began with the rise of Black Sabbath. As the world mourned Ozzy's passing, long-buried truths about the band's inner struggles started to emerge. Beneath the surface of fame and legacy, there had been deep, unresolved conflicts that the public had never seen. While tributes poured in for Ozzy, Tonny was left to confront the far more sobering reality: Black Sabbath, the legendary band he had helped build, was disintegrating for good. The final years of Black Sabbath were far from harmonious. Despite decades of success, sold-out shows, and millions of records sold, the unity that once defined the band had slowly eroded. Longtime friendships became strained. The connection that had carried them through their rise was breaking apart. Ozzy was contending with health complications, personal demons, and addiction. At the same time, Tonny was fighting his own silent war, a battle with cancer that threatened his life and his music. He tried to preserve the spirit of the band, to keep the sound of Sabbath alive, but the relationships behind the scenes were unraveling. Creative disagreements became frequent. Tensions flared over the band's musical direction, their future, and their personal lives. Things became especially complicated when Ozzy rejoined the group during its final phase. Though he and Tonny had shared a deep bond, their ideas often clashed. Ozzy, at times, expressed frustration toward Tonny, especially when tough decisions about touring and songwriting needed to be made. Despite a foundation of mutual respect and friendship, these differences made collaboration difficult. As Tonny's health declined, his ability to participate in every project diminished. He could no longer contribute to each musical plan with the same intensity. The remaining members faced the growing question: could Black Sabbath still survive without the unity that once held it together? This uncertainty didn't just weigh on the band's future, it ate away at Tonny personally. He knew deep down what was happening. Black Sabbath was coming to an end. Albums like 13, released in 2013, still echoed the band's signature sound. But the fire, the boldness, the creative spark of their prime, it wasn't there. The music felt worn. And the cracks within the band were clearly reflected in their performances. Though some late-stage success followed, the energy that once defined Black Sabbath had faded. Fatigue, internal strife, and hidden truths tore at the group's foundation. Tonny had kept these secrets for years, but after Ozzy's death, the truth began to leak out. Conflicts over artistic control, lifestyle changes, and personal clashes made it impossible for the band to recapture the heights of its earlier days. Tonny, who had long fought to keep the band's legacy alive, was left facing the end. Ozzy's death didn't just close the book on a partnership, it sealed the end of an era in rock history. And for Tonny, it marked the start of a new kind of loneliness, one compounded by his illness and the absence of his closest musical ally. The dissolution of Black Sabbath wasn't just the conclusion of a band, it was the curtain call for a genre-defining era of music. Alone in his grief, Tonny was left to ask himself if he could continue living in the shadow of memories, knowing that everything had changed and that the people who had built that journey with him were now gone. But out of that sorrow came a remarkable act of resilience. Despite the pain, despite the illness, despite the loss, Tonny Iommi proved that the human spirit is stronger than any hardship. Even as cancer left his body frail, the fire of music still burned in him. After enduring punishing rounds of chemotherapy and months in recovery, Tonny made an extraordinary decision: he would return. Not just to the studio or the stage, but to the very soul of Black Sabbath. His comeback wasn't just a performance, it was a resurrection. A man who had faced death and refused to surrender his passion. That decision led to the continuation of Black Sabbath's final tour, a monumental farewell not only for the fans, but for the legacy they had all helped to create. Tonny's return wasn't just about music. It was a spiritual revival, of purpose, of connection, and of life itself. Standing once again under stage lights, surrounded by thousands of devoted fans, Tonny rediscovered what music truly meant to him. It was never just a career, it was who he was. And despite the pain and exhaustion, those moments filled him with a strength that medicine never could. The album 13, released in 2013, became a symbol of this rebirth. With the original members contributing, it recaptured a glimpse of the band's former glory. Tonny's guitar work, though limited by his health, remained unmistakably powerful, his riffs once again captivating listeners across generations. The tour that followed, aptly titled The End, wasn't just a goodbye. It was a heartfelt tribute to the decades of loyalty from fans, the power of their shared legacy, and the strength of one man's will to carry it forward. After the tour, Tonny didn't fade away. He continued to write music, collaborating on new projects that explored the raw emotions of life, death, and survival. Songs like God Is Dead and End of the Beginning weren't just heavy metal anthems, they were emotional testaments to his personal battles and the struggles of an entire generation of rock pioneers. These tracks carried the weight of farewell. They honored those who had stood by Sabbath through every storm and transformation. During this time, Tonny received overwhelming support from fans, fellow musicians, and family. Many had doubted whether he could continue. Yet he proved them wrong. Music wasn't just something he did, it was inseparable from who he was. His recovery journey didn't just restore his health, it revealed the depth of his strength. As Black Sabbath returned to the stage and 13 found its place among the band's classics, Tonny confirmed something far deeper than a comeback. He proved that the artist, the fighter, and the legend inside him had never left. Tonny Iommi's return alongside Black Sabbath sent shockwaves through the fan community, igniting a surge of excitement among rock and metal enthusiasts. The intensity and passion still alive in both their classic and new melodies reminded the world that Black Sabbath's legacy was far from over. This was more than just a musical comeback, it was a deeply human triumph, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of a legend who had faced unimaginable pain and loss yet continued to rise. Iommi's influence stretches beyond his guitar skills. He's not just a legendary musician, he's a symbol of strength and perseverance. He stood tall in the face of illness and overcame every obstacle life threw at him. His riffs are more than just music, they are anthems of resilience that live on in the hearts of fans. Black Sabbath remains a cornerstone of rock history, a band whose impact can never be replicated or replaced. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and legacy of Tonny Iommi, a true icon of Black Sabbath. His story proves that when passion meets determination, nothing is impossible. If you're inspired by tales of musical resilience and legendary artists, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with your friends. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear which artists have inspired you and changed the world.